Welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, we're going to republish an episode I published on the Restore podcast around reflections of paramedics in 2024 with Keir Rutherford and Lisa Burrell. They're both hosts on the Pre-Sport Care podcast, and in the session, we really just dig into some of their experiences, challenges, and indeed growth that has defined their career in paramedicine. So it really was a profound conversation and covered a lot of ground, really. That's partly the reason why I wanted to share it on this podcast, is it really just capture the essence of what it means to be a critical care paramedic in this day and age. But also we cover a lot of ground around resilience, what resilience actually means, whether our current definitions are sufficient, whether they should be imposed or transposed onto other people. And also just what it means to support people working on the front line. We also look at the impact of vicarious trauma, also the toll of witnessing human suffering over time, and how these experiences have shaped Keir and Lisa in the profession. So one of the most important aspects of the conversation really is around post-traumatic growth that both Keir and Lisa mention, and exploring how adversity and trauma can lead to a profound sense of personal transformation, and indeed a renewed sense of purpose in the role. So this conversation is an emotional roller coaster. It really does reflect the landscape of critical care. It's a little bit different. It is recorded for the Restore podcast, so what I try and do is deconstruct some of the medical terms for maybe a non-medical listenership. But I hope you get something out of it. I hope that it really does resonate more on a personal level, really, than anything else. I wish everyone a great 2025 and lots more to come from the Pre-Sport Care podcast in 25. We're going to really start to focus on mini-series in 2025. So we've recorded a 3-part mini-series on medical legal aspects of Pre-Sport Care, a 3-part mini-series on geriatric aspects of Pre-Sport Care, a 3-part mini-series on pediatric aspects of Pre-Sport Care, and really doing deep dives into these aspects. We've also recorded a mini-series on AI and how AI is shaping Pre-Sport Care and how we interact with technology both for training and indeed for practice within 2025. So I do wish you a happy new year. We'll see you on the other end of 25, and thanks again for supporting the podcast. Here is the profound and indeed insightful conversation with Keir and Lisa. Welcome back to the podcast. What we're going to do in this episode is I'm sat here together with 2 critical care paramedics with me, Keir Rutherford and Lisa Burrell. What we're going to do in this episode is just really unpack their fundamental journey into paramedicine and just get some of their reflections from doing over 15 years in clinical practice, but also just lifting the lid on how they process trauma, but also how they see people in their worst moments of life, and indeed the privilege it is to really see these people in their worst moments of life, and how you steer someone through those pivotal times in their lives. So Keir and Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Owen, thanks for having us.
Hey.
It's good to have you both with us. So I guess my first question would be really, and I'll ask it initially to Lisa, would be, could you speak to just the privilege it is, and then I'll come to Keir, of being with people and being with families and being with patients in some of their worst and best moments of life, maybe childbirth, but very much death, as a critical care paramedic. Could I get you to speak to the privilege and just your reflections on that, really?
Yeah, well, this goes right to the core of why I joined the job, and probably a few times why I've thought about leaving the job. When I was young and hadn't committed to a career path, I remember somebody at a family gathering collapsing. There was this heightened anxiety, panic, whatever, going on around whether he was going to be all right. Somebody called for an ambulance. My job was to go to the end of the driveway to wave madly and flag down the ambulance. And I was so relieved when they arrived, because I just thought, now it's going to be okay. And I never really realised how much that inspired me. to want to be that person who was able to make somebody feel like it's going to be okay. But actually, when you start the job, I remember saying to my mum, who was a doctor, and she said, you know, are you sure that you want to do this? You don't want to study medicine? You want to do... And I said, Mum, I just want to be with people in that moment when it's something terrible's happening and I can make it okay. And I remember that was a real motivator for me. And I used to think, I'm going to be there and I'm going to say the right thing and I'm going to do something magical to make it better. And actually, when you start the job, you feel really disappointed in yourself because you've put on yourself an expectation that is supernatural, like completely impossible. You're not there to... Sometimes you don't have the power to change the terrible thing that's happening. And that was really uncomfortable for me when I was developing my understanding of my role within all of this and how I could support people who were going through all of that. You know, if I couldn't deliver them some medicine that was going to make them better, what was I going to say to them? You can't turn up and say to somebody it's okay, because actually in that moment it's really important that it's not okay and that we all understand and that their reaction is completely okay. And we can't try to, you know, pretend that they shouldn't be reacting the way they are. It took me a long time to start to experience the spectrum of the different ways that people react when they're experiencing loss, particularly. You know, you get people who completely explode, you get people who go completely silent, and lots in between that. And we're working alongside crews who are often not as familiar or not as exposed to it as we are. And their reaction, there's this sort of triangulation of reactions going on where everybody's having a reaction to other people's reactions, right? So I suppose I've come to a place where I'm really comfortable just to be alongside someone in that moment and support what it is that they're feeling in that moment and to let them have the reaction that they need to have. And actually, it's a huge privilege just to be alongside somebody when you can't change it. Yeah. And I think that people feel the power of a human connection when they know that you're just there with them. Yeah. And actually sometimes you're not there to do something or say something or fix something, but you are. It's just the humanity of being with someone.
Gosh, that's powerful actually. Really powerful. Just that presence with someone. And I think a lot of the role is, you're right, you can't fix it actually, and you're right, just being there. Keir, to yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I find now it's bearing witness, and you are witnessing something. You know, you're there as a healthcare professional, but you're also there to bear witness, you know, somebody's life that has ended, or bear witness to a pretty, you know, kind of monumental tragedy in someone's life, you know, that's life changing or family changing. And yeah, you know, it's interesting what you said, Lisa, about, you know, kind of being there, you know, the kind of reasons for joining the job. And it's, you know, this was something I always wanted to do from my kind of early teen years. And, you know, it was this interest, this kind of, you know, what did paramedics do? And a lot of it was that interest in, you know, kind of turning up and doing stuff. But actually, you know, the more you go on and the more time you spend in the job, actually it's about those relationships, you know, that kind of, that time that you spend with people, the family, the patients, you know. And I think, you know, it's probably, you know, you kind of the some of the ones that you really remember, you know. And I think some of the patients that I really remember are some of the talk and die patients that you've spent some time with, and they might have been critically unwell and they've subsequently died on you. And that is fairly profound, because I think a lot of the patients that we turn up to, you know, certainly in my kind of past roles working on an ambulance, most of those patients, that was not something I was regularly seeing. And having that, you know, kind of, you would be with the patient maybe for an hour, 2 hours sometimes, you know, you'd get to know them, they'd get to know you, you know, you'd have a very different kind of you know, time with them, really, you know, kind of building this kind of short relationship with people, and then you drop them off at hospital or leave them at home and you'd be on to the next patient. But, you know, I think they're kind of, that you can have these very profound moments, you know, and probably what I never really thought about in my early days is coming into being a paramedic, that, you know, actually it can really, you can take a lot of that stuff home, and, you know, it isn't necessarily the kind of the big injuries, but it's what cuts you deep sometimes is those personal connections, you know. And I can think of a few patients, certainly a couple of patients, talk or die patients, and then they like subsequently died on me and the team that I've been with, and, you know, you've really tried to kind of, you know, do something for them, but, you know, no matter what you've done, they've died in ED. But it's yeah, you know, I think it's those times and those experiences that you have. It isn't around the care. It's around, you know, it's around, because I think we remove ourselves from being clinicians. It's more about being a human being and building relationships and connections with people. And then the risk is sometimes as well as then you put it into your perspective. Because it's quite easy to go to some patients and not really feel connected, but you do then go to jobs where you do suddenly feel connected, and it reminds you of your family or the people you know, or, you know, going to patients that are younger than you that have died, you know. I mean, that unfortunately, that's, I think working in London, working as a London APP, we target those calls regularly. So, you know, that's become, I suppose, less of a kind of, you know, shock. But I still think there's things, you know, those kind of pretty visceral experiences you can have, which you don't necessarily expect. And if you're not guarded to it, sometimes it catches you.
Well, that actually, I think it's powerful. And actually, I've got a question on the back of that, because there was an aggregation in me actually of, and you said something which is key. It was the ones which I didn't expect. So the ones which were really, you know, quite, you know, traumatic, jumping out of windows, or, you know, penetrating trauma, like a knife attack or something, was visceral and was, you know, very emotive, but didn't necessarily affect me. But the one which affected me actually was a cancer patient in the middle of the day, and it was breaking the bad news to the family and to the mother, to the wife and to the daughter, and just seeing their whole world. Because I think there's something with cancer where people entrench, not in a very visceral way. You have a fighting mindset, and you fight for your loved one. Your loved one fights, and again, especially when there's an element of denial of diagnosis, that there is an element of not necessarily engaging with reality, and then when this seminal moment occurs, the cardiac arrest occurs, it all hits at once, it all compounds and hits at once. And I remember getting back into the car at 11 a.m. in the morning and just thinking, oh, I need a gin and tonic so badly right now. Like, it's just so overwhelming. And you're right, that's that human connection. And, you know, the lady was in her mid to late 70s, but just the pain, I could feel her pain, and the daughter's pain. And, you know, she hugged me, which is absolutely fine, but the pain came really close to me, and I engaged with that, but then thought, this is, it took me a while. And actually what I had to do was go to counselling actually on the back of that, because I thought I just have to talk about this and talk through this. And actually I thought, of all the crazy shit that I've been to over the years, from 10 years with London HEMS, the Helicopter Emergency Medical Services and ground-based, this caught me out. And it caught me at 11 a.m. on some random weekday. And actually, I thought, wow, there's a certain element of vigilance, you know, and no one's bulletproof. But so that's powerful. And I guess my question on the back end of that to Lisa and to you, Keir, would be how you've processed some of this vicarious trauma, or the aggregation of trauma, the aggregation of these some horrendous scenes, and maybe not so horrendous, but have struck a note with you. Lisa, to yourself.
Yeah, well, I was just mulling over that word connection, and connecting to people. Before I was a paramedic, I used to work for social services, actually, supporting families with difficulties, supporting families specifically with children with difficulties. And I loved it, but I also couldn't bear it after a very short while, actually, of doing it, because I used to take those cases home because I was really connected to the family. I spent an awful lot of time, and really went, was really taken into the heart of the family, if you know what I mean. So there was something attractive about becoming a paramedic, because I thought I can make it's like a big hit but short connection time, right? Big fix. I could do something really meaningful in such a short time that I will not connect to those people. I'll be able to just move on and see the next one and do the next thing. But you have these cases that knock you sideways, and you have a lot of sleepless nights in this job. Doesn't matter how far up the chain you go, you have a lot of sleepless nights. I would say you get exposed. Yes, there is such a thing as stress inoculation. You get sort of immune to some of the exposure, but there are cases that you connect to. And when you connect to them, what do you do? And I've seen what I would describe as very binary responses to that. I've seen ambulance clinicians who just decide intentionally not to connect. So when something looks like their patient might connect with them, people switch themselves off, and that's like an intentional protective thing that people do. And I understand that, and maybe I also used to do that, but I don't do that now, because I feel the privilege, like I suppose I was leading to earlier, of being with somebody in their pain. I think people find huge meaning in moments of pain. Humans always have. So when I'm in that moment with the person, I allow them to have a connection with me, and I know that that's going to absorb some of my cognitive, emotional energy, well-being, and I know I'm going to take that case away. I know I'm going to reflect on it, and I know it's sometimes going to be a case that wakes me up for a few days. I am lucky. I have a good support network around me, and I like to talk. I talk to my husband, and he sometimes doesn't like to talk, but he recognises when there's a case that I need to talk out, right? And we have good friends around us, and I think we all have, whatever you call that person, we all have somebody who's kind of a failure friend, or somebody you'll go to when something's really weighing on you. And that person, I think it's really valuable to have a person like that in your life, whoever they are. So talking is a really good way of dealing with that. But I wouldn't advocate people avoid the connection. Yeah. I think that you lose the meaning of what you're doing in your place, being there with people.
Absolutely powerful. Absolutely. Keir, yourself, how do you process it, or deal with it, or engage with it?
It becomes I think because it's like a daily grind. You build a lot of resilience up, and I think like what you were just referring to, Lisa. You do build a resilience up, and you do build up a way of dealing with it. And I think you park it there, and I think they're perhaps things happen to people in people's career. There's a big one-off event, and that's it. But I think doing this, and because it's the job and the nature of the job, and being very resilient, and being able to kind of perhaps talk about something or square something away, but what you're doing is you're just putting it away, and it's the small little bits you're putting away, and it all builds up, and you start to kind of notice in yourself an irritability. You're not really wanting to be at work as much as you probably want to be. You're feeling a bit tired with work. Your practice might change in how you're communicating with families, communicating with patients, and you probably then need some time off. And it's, so I think we still don't do it well. And I think there's definitely strategies. I cycle or run home from work, and I find that, certainly if there's something that's, a job's not gone that well, or I've not been that great, or, something's happened on the job or it's been a bad job. That's, kind of that process from, cycling from work to home is a transition. And I can kind of get some of that stuff out and think about it. And certainly if I run or cycle, that element of just processing it and getting it out. And I think generally that really helps me. And, I get a lot from doing that. But, there's still stuff that kind of sticks, but I think I try and process it. I think over time I process things differently now, and I try not to now see the kind of, I think it has caused harm to me before in the past, but I also do look at, it is something we see every day, and death, I think it's changed my concept of death, and it's changed my concept of these situations that I know at some point in the future, and you could think of this as a bad way to think about it and a damaging way to think about it, but I will die, my parents will die, my partner will die, close friends of mine will die. I've had, a friend of mine died 4 months ago who I was at school with, and it's something that's going to happen to us all. And I suppose it's then changing that concept, and actually, we see it day in, day out, but actually it makes me now really appreciate what I have, and really appreciate the boring, the mundane, just the small things in life, going for a walk, going to the pub. It makes me feel very grateful to, I had to move home back to my parents about a couple of months ago because we had building work at home, and just going back as an adult and being told off by your parents, and you could get really frustrated with it, but it was comical because actually I looked at it in a way that actually at some point in down the line that won't happen again, and I think for me, although it is harmful, I can actually see the other side to it as well, where it really makes me appreciate the life that I've got.
Yeah, and I guess just from a resilience perspective, I'm going to read a poem shortly, but before I do that, and then get your thoughts on this poem, but before I do that, could I just get you to speak to resilience and just how you perceive it, because you both have a unique view. You both interact with quite a young workforce. You both either educate or interact with quite a young workforce now. How do you see resilience within that workforce, and indeed, should we be imposing our definition of resilience on that workforce, or how should that look? Lisa, I'll go to you first and then to Keir.
Yeah, so I guess there's a question about why people carry trauma around with them, why they carry certain experiences negatively around within them, and do we all need to be resilient? Do we need to cultivate a resilient workforce? I don't feel like. I mean, you could say that some people haven't developed the resilience for some things that they see, but also, I don't want to tell people that they have to be more resilient. I mean, I don't think I'm a resilient person at all. I think that I take it for what it is, and if I have a reaction, I have a reaction. If somebody has a reaction, they have a reaction, right? We should just be comfortable with how we feel about things. I think telling people that they need to develop resilience can be quite a artificial thing, and we end up hiding behind walls when we start doing things like that. Going back to why do people carry around negativity inside them? Sometimes it's because they've been exposed to something that just felt like an injustice. It just shouldn't have happened, right? That person was too young to die. That thing just, the timing of that caused that thing to happen was just unbelievable, and you just carry around a sense of injustice. Sometimes what you're carrying around inside you is a sense of guilt. And I know that sounds odd because you were there to help the person, but we're all training, we're doing things, and Keir sort of described, sometimes there's jobs that don't go well, You carry around inside you the sense of, I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have, I should have been able to. I wish I'd done those sorts of feelings. And I don't know. We're talking about restoration here. I think that a huge part of restoration comes in forgiveness. And one of the problems in the paramedic world is that you're so isolated. You deal with an event and then you walk away from it, and there is no continuity to close the loop on some of that you take away with you. It's wonderful if you work in a system where there is patient follow-up, because sometimes you will meet the family again, or you'll meet the patient again, or you'll meet somebody who's connected to that person again, and you have this terrible looming sensation inside you, but they can say to you, oh, that's all right, you didn't give that drug, it's totally fine, I'm so glad you were there and you did your best. And the huge release that gives people, it is the power of feeling forgiven, feeling accepted for what you did in that moment. And sometimes people really need to hear that. So sometimes I think that's a big part of it, but sometimes you have to find a path within your own belief system to allow yourself freedom from that pain. It's quite it never goes away otherwise. You'll take it into the next job. It's a cyclical thing, always looming in the back of your mind that you've failed that patient, or weren't able to do something for that patient, or that patient that got away from you, or the connection that surprised you. It's cyclical unless you find a way to air it. I don't know.
Process it, air it, and get it out. Yeah, absolutely, and come to peace with it.
Come to peace.
Yeah, Keir.
Yeah, I think off the back of what you're saying about your trauma, and this isn't like, I've heard someone talk about this recently. It's like, it isn't your trauma as well, is it? And like, actually, sometimes we take people's trauma on, where actually that isn't our trauma. We've gone there as a healthcare professional. I think like resilience, and I don't know, is my resilience healthy? And my resilience is out of the back of all my experiences, kind of from growing up, through being a teenager, through my 20s, through my job, through life experiences, and it's given me the resilience to be able to, do this job. But is that healthy? Is it healthy for, I've been doing this for 9 years now, to day in, day out, bear witness and see really terrible things. And, I think kind of maybe a lot of people want to do critical care, but do people want to, and I suppose the reality of critical care is, do people, what maybe people don't appreciate or see, is do people for an extended period of time want to bear witness to some really bad stuff again and again and again? And I think, if people, so I think kind of resilience is a bit of a kind of difficult word, it's I think, in the setting that we come from, in critical care, high performance teams, teams that want to excel and do stuff, resilience is is it a bit of a buzzword maybe, potentially? It's seen as something, it's seen as a good characteristic. Some people on the outside might say that actually resilience is unhealthy, that sort of resilience is unhealthy, because our resilience is, bouncing back and doing it again, and I suppose just finally on that, I think off the post of a certain incident, having kind of counselling post London Bridge, and the woman that I worked with at the time, off the door, she said how unhealthy our job was. And, she was really kind of thingy to that, saying about how damaging and how not good, because we talked about what we do. And she gave me all these coping strategies to do the job. And, I've talked about this before, and, kind of certainly with you, Owen, in the other podcast, and about that post-traumatic growth. And that one event built my resilience. And, I left working with her with my resilience increased even more. But I also reflect on that and think, at the very beginning she was saying how damaging this job is, but she actually made me more resilient to come back and do it, but to take more on and do more and see, actually I've got through this really traumatic event where I can just keep doing, I can keep exposing myself now. So that's maybe not, is that healthy? So I think we have to be careful with resilience and about what our expectations are on other staff and on other people, because I think people will cope with it how they need to cope with it. I think we just need to support people when they've had traumatic experiences.
Yeah, that's powerful. It's absolutely powerful. Okay, I'm going to read this poem, a bit left field, but what I'm going to do is read the poem. It's very short, actually, and then I'm going to unpack how it landed for me, and then we're actually going to get how it lands for you, for both of you. It's only three paragraphs, three short paragraphs, and it's called Jereza Easter by Robert Bly. Please tell me why the lamb is in love with the wolf, and why the child's finger calls the hammer down, and why at dusk Alexander walks towards his enemies. Tell me why the gazelle grazes so close to the lion, and why the rat makes up games on the snake's tail, and why the student bends his head when he's attacked. One meadow in the redwoods can contain 1,000 ferns. By this we deduced we are living in the serpent's home. Each curly fern is his tongue unfolding. So I read that poem, and I read it the other day in preparation to, I'm going to speak about decision making under high stress environments on Friday for an air ambulance. I read that poem as part of a psychological safety forum, and just talking about different aspects of human factors and also of concepts of decision making. What that poem really spoke to me about, and I'd like to get your perspectives on this, is please tell me why the lamb is in love with the wolf, and why the child's finger calls the hammer down, and why at dusk Alexander walks towards his enemies. I think a large part of critical care, we see people taking risks that they do not perceive until it is too late. We see the proclivity of young males and females, but a lot of young males, edging and living in the territory of the wolf, pushing their car to the limits, pushing their gang culture to the limits, living in fundamentally with risk that they can't hold until it's toppled over into the circumstances that they are now finding themselves in, and then you enter the room. But the human proclivity to push the boundaries, to constantly push the boundaries of risk when you're younger. And I think maybe my story, maybe your story, both of your stories is a journey towards conservatism as you get older, because you see how much risk people hold when they're young, and you see it on a daily basis. But this desire for the lamb to be in love with the wolf, to kind of live in the territory of risk, the child would call down the hammer because they want to live in this risky place of exploration, of pushing the boundaries. But the fruition of that is mine and yours, certainly your daily life, when it goes too far. And I guess that really resonated with me, because the gazelle lives close to the lion, and they live in this ecosystem of a habitat. But actually, it doesn't negate the fact that one day the lion is going to prey upon that gazelle, and actually, you both interact in an ecosystem of a cosmopolitan service where gang culture riles and is a daily facet maybe of your work, and actually where violence spills over, where there is this habitual kind of habituation to the environment, but also this coexistence. But then every so often the lion preys on the gazelle, and a 14-year-old's lying with a screwdriver in their chest. And I guess what I'm notioning towards, and what the poem notion towards, is this proclivity to hold risk, but as a young person not appreciate the consequences of that risk. And actually, it took me to a place, and probably takes you both to a place of you've seen the fruition, that 14, 15-year-old lying on the floor, that the person pulling the person out of the car, maybe in traumatic cardiac arrest, because that's the edge case from a maybe 30, 40, 50 cases where they pushed it too far on that wet road and that dark night, on that Sunday after a few more drinks, too many drinks. It really resonated with me. I don't know, could you I guess my question is, does it resonate with you? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't speak to you. But I have found myself with these young people with so much potential. I can see an 18-year-old now that I went to with Steve Rashford, pulled him out in traumatic cardiac arrest, and he was doing triple the speed limit on a Sunday night in the rain, in the dark. And you just think, you're living in the land of lions, and you never even knew it, and it's just bitten you fatally.
I suppose it's people feel invincible, you know, and don't see consequence. But there's also probably a degree to that, kind of certainly in that first paragraph, that there's an element of self-destruction as well, you know, and actually in people there is an element of people do self-destruct, and they do stuff to you know, kind of, that is dangerous and that is living on the kind of borderline of kind of harming themselves, you know. But you know, it's also probably, you know, certainly around some of the kind of gang violence, it's a situation of where they are, and, you know, kind of what their life is, and, you know, kind of more that being forced on them potentially, or by complete, you know, fluke, you know, they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. But yeah, there's probably a lot around people do feel invincible, that it won't happen to them. And then, you know, within some there is a kind of self-destruct mode, and people will do things that probably most people would think isn't quite safe. I think that's probably my experience.
Yeah. I'm thinking in two different zones now. I'm not really thinking around gang violence, because I think there's a whole social demographic that builds towards things that we still can't explain around that. But don't you think everyone to some extent wants to understand who they are within the context of the universe they exist in? They want to test the boundaries, they want to push, maybe they want to understand how much power they have, you know, as a human in this world, in this complex world. And I don't know, some of this I think is people pushing to find out where the limits are, to understand themselves within that context. And that's definitely a characteristic of the young. They want to understand themselves within a social context, they want to understand themselves within a physical context, they want to understand the power relationship they have with the world. I'm not saying that all risk taking is like that, but there is a sense of testing the boundaries sometimes of, can this get me? Will this snake reach out and bite me if I tease it, you know? Maybe some of that thrill-seeking attitude is motivated in wanting to understand what they can control, I don't know, and feeling the buzz of being free, you know, and being able to control some stuff that they weren't sure they had control and power over, and they've pushed and tested, and on that occasion it's gone well for them. I don't know what motivates that and drives that in people.
Absolutely. And I think what saddens me sometimes is just the loss of, not only the loss of life, but the loss of potential in people's lives, especially in the young. I guess my last question really, as we come into land on the conversation, would be around, and it kind of is a weird question, that popped up, and it's been something me and Keir have spoken about before when we used to work at the same ambulance station, was around this kind of attraction to chaos and to instilling calm in amongst chaos, and a sense of order and system and process. But seeing the sharp end of chaos really on a daily basis, certainly within critical care as a critical care paramedic. Could I get you to both speak to, and maybe Keir, you first, as to whether that's still the case for you, and whether you still sort of get a slight buzz from instilling order from chaos?
No, I mean, probably less so. You know, I suppose what I see myself as a clinician doing, or as a clinical leader, is about bringing teams together and allowing them, empowering them to do what they've been trained to do, and just almost turning up and being able to reset a scene. And also at times maybe advocating for my team, you know, that there might be an external influence in that, you know, perhaps people aren't feeling that they have the power or the ability to challenge people, or, you know, change something, where, you know, I do, and I probably feel like I can kind of then advocate for my team. But, you know, it's, you know, and I understand why chaos can happen, you know, and it's, you know, so I suppose I still enjoy seeing my teams that I then go in and work with, you know, delivering care, and seeing what they're capable of doing, and seeing, you know, kind of how they've, you know, kind of, you know, afterwards as well, if we would do a debrief, or, you know, that people feel that they've done their best, you know, and that makes them feel good, because, you know, they've felt like they've been able to function as a team, function as a clinician, and try and give that patient the best outcome. That'd be.
When I was listening to your poem, I thought it was about, at the beginning when I started listening to it, I thought it was about us and We're the Lamb going into the wolf, going into on every job, right? And how actually there is something addictive about going up against the wolf and winning, you know, and actually that is probably something that, it is kind of an addictive, it's compelling. So there is something compelling within what we do about going up against the wolf and having a good outcome. But sometimes the wolf does bite.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not losing sight of that. But it's an interesting perspective, actually. And it's about, I think fundamentally it's about knowing your own fallibility, or at least being appreciating that it exists. And one of my revelations was exactly that. Actually, that call I spoke about with the cancer patient, it's about understanding I'm just not shaking this. I'm not processing this. I need to talk about this to someone, and then going forward and just getting help, because the naive me was, I'm bulletproof, nothing's touching me, until it does, and until you get bit by the wolf, and you think, I've got an option here. I can ignore this and it can just fester, or I can do something about it because I'm not sleeping right, and I'm just not processing this properly, and this pain is almost like it's organic and it's mine, and it shouldn't be, because I bore witness to this. It's not my pain. So right, Oren, you need to go and get help and speak to someone. But it's about appreciating one's own fallibility, I think, and I think that's a powerful revelation.
I think the one of the, you know, when you work in this field or within this, you know, kind of speciality, and certainly here in London, is that once you are on that path, you know, you are on a journey, and you don't really have a choice about what's coming at you. And, you know, we're a small team, there's not many of us, and we look for the worst jobs. And you, through doing this for a number of years, you are on a journey, and whatever comes at you, you're going to be dealing with and experiencing and going through, no matter what that is. And you're going to have to take some ownership of that, and you inherit that situation. Whether or not you like it or not, just by the nature of turning up to work, you suddenly inherit some of the most clinically challenging and situationally difficult situations that happen pre-hospital in London.
Yeah.
And you don't really get a choice, but you did get a choice because you came into work.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty hard going sometimes.
Yeah. Listen, thank you both for your time. It's just been really powerful just to get both of your reflections. I think selfishly, I just love spending time just hearing from you both, actually, just reframing some of my thoughts. So it's great to get your thoughts and your reflections. Thank you both.
Thanks, Owen.
Thanks, Owen.